So when I was growing up, my family, we went to a really great church. Man, I had a lot of great memories there. I made a lot of friends. We went camping. We had sleepovers. It was just a very tight-knit family. Just a lot of great memories. Until one year, things started to fall apart. There were some serious infightings among the leaders of the church. There were allegations of emotional adultery between one married man and another person's wife. And instead of facing the issue, it was initially swept under the rug. But people, they talk, they gossip. People started to take sides. There were threats of lawsuits, like actual lawsuits. And some people were secretly taping phone conversations for evidence. Felt like a TV show. The church became this toxic place, and eventually it split the church. People left. My family left the church. And my 11-year-old heart was broken. I didn't get it. I don't understand. These guys are adults. They're 40-year-olds. Why are they fighting like this? Hopefully that's Jesus calling. Just kidding. Just answer it. You can answer. Don't worry. No one will be upset. But it was interesting because it's a few people that ruined this wonderful community. I really believe that every Christian is meant to experience a type of fellowship, a type of community where you feel loved, where you feel like you belong, where you feel like you can experience Jesus in every aspect of your life. And maybe people here right now have found that at this church. And that's great. That's awesome. But a little warning. We can't take that for granted. We have to protect that type of fellowship because there are some sins that are so great that they can break a community. They can break a fellowship. And this is the reason why the church needs to have standards. Standards to protect its members, to protect its reputation. And that is my big question today, is what moral standards should we have in the church? What should we have in the church so it doesn't happen? So what happened at my old church happens again. We don't want that to happen. So what kind of standards should we have in the church? And that's what our Bible passage is about today. We're going to read from 1 Corinthians. We're starting a whole new series. So we're going to read from 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 1 to 13. So if you have your Bibles, please open it. If you do not, it'll be up on the screen. Here, Paul is writing to the church in the city of Corinth. And it is an interesting story. Verse 1, this is what it says. It is actually reported that there is sexual immorality among you, and of a kind that even pagans do not tolerate. A man is sleeping with his father's wife. Verse 2, and you are proud. Shouldn't you have gone into mourning have put out of your fellowship the man who has been doing this? Let's skip to verse 9. I wrote to you in my letter not to associate with sexually immoral people. Not at all meaning the people of this world who are immoral or the greedy and swindlers or idolaters. In that case, you would have to leave this world. But now I'm writing to you that you must not associate with anyone who claims to be a brother or sister but is sexually immoral or greedy, an idolater or slanderer, a drunkard or swindler. Do not even eat with such people. What business is it of mine to judge those outside the church? Are you not to judge those inside? God will judge those outside. Expel the wicked person from among you. Woo, man, this is quite the story. It's quite spicy. It does remind me of a TV show. Absolute scandal. An absolute scandal in the church, in the Corinthian church. There is a man who claims to be a Christian. There's a man who claims to be a Christian. Some commentators say this man may have been a leader, he may have been a person of influence, and he's having sex with his stepmom. Dang. He's sleeping with his father's wife. If that happened today, if that happened in our church, it would still be a scandal. It would be a scandal today. And it was scandalous back then too. Here's a little history about the city of Corinth. Corinth was originally a Greek city, and it was said to be the birthplace of Aphrodite, the goddess of love. We were supposed to say it together. Love. Everyone knows love. The goddess of love. Now, they had a temple for Aphrodite, and at one point, the temple had 1,000 prostitutes, okay? The temple had 1,000 prostitutes doing sexual activities to bring in donations, okay? To bring in donations to the temple. It was a respected part of their culture. It was normal, okay? It was normal for people in Corinth to go to the temple and engage in sexual acts. The city was so famous for its culture that people made up a word to describe this kind of behavior. In the Greek language, the word to Corinthianize meant to engage in all kinds of sexual acts. So Paul was writing to Christians who were heavily influenced by this sexualized culture. It was difficult for many Christians in the Corinthian church to let go of those, let's say, bad habits, okay? To let go of those attitudes. Now, if you read both letters, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Paul sounds like an agitated dad. He's always upset. He's like, you guys again, scolding his misbehaving children. So like in any church, there were lots of sinners. But Paul hones in on one of them. The one sleeping with his father's wife. It was really bad. So bad that Paul tries to drive home to the point the severity of it. In verse 1, he says, this kind of sin, even the pagans do not tolerate. They don't tolerate. Those people out there, they're not even doing this kind of thing. Yet it's happening in the church. It's happening in here. Paul's livid. He's upset. He's kind of mad like me. Like yesterday, I was so upset when Luka Doncic got traded. Like, are we on drugs? Like, what are we doing? What are we doing here? he uses a lot of strong language. He uses a lot of strong language, and he's mad at this church because they don't seem to care. What's worse was they were even proud of it. Proud of it. Paul says in verse 2, and you are proud? Shouldn't you rather gone into mourning and have put out of your fellowship the man who has been doing this? So there was maybe some Christians that are like, yeah, man. Maybe they're encouraging it. They're proud. Now here's the thing about this man. He was not repentant, okay? He was not repentant. He was not remorseful. The affair was not a momentary slip-up sparked by passion, but done openly, defiantly. It was done proudly. Like, he's like, yeah, look what I'm doing. Like, there's this attitude. It revealed this attitude in his heart that he was accountable to no one. Not accountable to Jesus, and not even accountable to the societal standards of that time. So Paul tells the church, kick him out. Kick him out. Very strong language. You know, all of us are like, well, let's just show grace. You know, a lot of some people are like, let's just love. Paul's like, kick him out. Of course, not every sinner had to leave, but for this guy, he had to go. He was bad for the church. He was pushing the boundaries of sin. And by his example, he was encouraging people to do the same. He was damaging the reputation of the church. As a result, he was making it harder for people to start following Jesus. And there's the thing that I want you guys to understand. God cares about the reputation of the church. He cares about the reputation of the church. I saw this recently in my own life. You know, when all the horrible things those Christians did during the time of residential schools, you know, and it became like it was all over the news. I had people come up to me telling me how awful Christianity is. It's awful. They were like getting mad and stuff. And I was feeling a little defensive, you know. I'm like, oh man, no, that. Because I'm like, I wasn't even there. Look at that picture. It's black and white. I don't know. I wasn't there. I didn't do anything. And that while that may be true, I did not do anything. It still affected me. What those Christians did still affected me. Like it or not, it affects our witness. So this guy in Corinth was bad for the church, bad for the Christian movement. But there was one more reason to kick him out. This guy needed to learn that calling Jesus Lord, which a lot of us do. We love to say, He's my Lord and Savior, you know. He needed to learn that calling Jesus Lord actually means something. And that's something for us too. This calling Jesus Lord means something to us. He needed a wake-up call. If you read verse 5 of our chapter, Paul says kicking him out was for his own good. He says, so that his spirit might maybe saved on the day of the Lord. This guy had been fooling himself into believing that maybe he could just believe in a few things about Jesus. Maybe he could just get baptized. Maybe he could just be part of a small group, or book clubs, or community groups. Maybe he could just be part of those things. But the truth is, this guy was only a Christian by name only. Because it was clear Jesus was not the Lord of his life. It was clear. And the church needed to help him see how lost he really is. And we could say, oh, that's that church. Oh, this kind of story can still happen in churches like ours. Some people are so lost spiritually that they've become a hazard to the local church. And they're hindering the Christian movement. And they need to know that they're not actually following Jesus. We have to let them know. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is boldly confront someone. Sure, you could do it lovingly, you could speak the truth in love, but sometimes you have to boldly confront someone and say, hey man, you're not following Jesus. To hold them to that account, help him be accountable. And sometimes the best thing to do for them and for everyone is to kick them out of the church. And I know you're like, that's mean. But sometimes it's necessary. It's a last resort, okay? It's not like we kick them out the first minute they get in, like, it's always a last resort. You don't want to do that. And cases like this are maybe rare, okay? We might even argue that it's rare. Most of us probably won't get kicked out. But this story still should speak to the rest of us because it reminds us that some sins are worse than others. I know some people like to claim, they say, all sins are equal. They're like, yeah, they like to claim that. But I don't think that's necessarily true because when Jesus was arrested, Jesus said to the Roman governor, therefore, the one who has handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin. Implying that some sins are worse than others. And it would help all of us to think about what our worst sin is. It'd be good to ask those hard questions. What is the sin in your life right now that most affects your relationship with God? What is the sin in your life that affects the church? Because we don't think communally. Sometimes we think sin, it's just my personal. We don't really want to think that affects everyone. So what sin in your life most affects the church? What sin in your life most affects your witness? We all have sins. Every single one of us. I have sins, okay, too. I'm not standing here and saying, I don't. We all have sins, me included. But some sins are more dangerous than others. And we need to be honest with ourselves. Honest reflection, wrestling with these things. We wrestle with our sin because some of us here don't have any remorse. We don't even feel, we become numb to sin. And my question is, why? Why? And you should ask that question. Why have you become numb to this? Take the time to be honest with yourself. Reflect. And my hope is that you offer this part of your life and you offer it to God. Because as Paul said in our passage, we need to judge the inside of the church. He says it meaning other Christians, but especially ourselves. But for those that aren't Christians, it's a bit of a different story. And that leads to my next point, that we need to be patient with the sins of people that don't follow Jesus. When I was church planning, I did that a few times. I did that a few years ago. My favorite part of church planning was meeting a lot of non-Christians. I loved it. I loved meeting people that had different values than me, different questions. They saw the world differently than me. I know some Christians are uncomfortable. They're uncomfortable when someone says a different thing that they disagree with and they get all weirded out and stuff. But man, I loved it. I thought it was fun. I thought it was fun engaging with people. So we had a church plant, and we had a couple come to our volunteer event. So something kind of like what Jeffrey is doing, like those mustard seed things. We would have a mustard seed, and then people would bring their friends. And we saw a lot of non-Christians love to serve and stuff. They love doing those things. So we had a couple come to our volunteer events. So this couple comes, and they're not Christians. They were living together, not married. They were actually having a baby out of wedlock. Okay, so they weren't married at that time. But we as a church didn't feel like we needed to get all confrontational. We took a different posture. So instead, we welcomed them. We loved on them. We shared the gospel. But I want to say this. As a church at GGC, we weren't shy about our Christian beliefs. So it wasn't like, we sugar-coated everything. No. We were not shy about our Christian beliefs, especially regarding sexual ethics. We talked and preached about it openly. But we talked about it openly with a humble, I would say, posture, okay, with humility. So they knew. We didn't hide anything. We were honest. They knew where we stood as a church. Yet they still kept coming. I'm like, what? You're like, when you preach about sin and stuff, you're scared sometimes. Oh my God, someone's going to get offended and they're on that church and they'll leave. But they kept coming and coming. They just kept coming. And God was good. Eventually, later on, God started moving in their lives, and then both became Christians, and then they got married. And it's funny because I love to ask questions. I just like to pry sometimes. But I asked them later, why'd you guys stay? Because we said a lot of offensive things. Well, offensive to the culture these days, okay? So, oh my gosh. And these days, you're going to get canceled for saying that. And we're like, why? Let's just ask you, honestly, seriously, why did you stay? Why did you keep coming to our church? And this is what she said. We stayed because you guys kept welcoming us. We never felt judged, even when we knew you guys had different convictions. I was like, dang. So we don't have to sugarcoat this Bible thing? We don't have to hide it? We can be honest? Oh yeah, we can be honest. I think having a humble posture about it really helps. And that's how their family found Jesus. Now I know some people, they like to think that we need to always be confrontational with non-Christians. Go in guns blazing. You're like, you're going to have a machine gun effect. I don't think that's what we necessarily see all the time in the Bible. Let's read verse 9 to 12 again, okay? Verse 9, Paul says, I wrote to you in my letter not to associate with sexually immoral people. Not at all meaning the people of this world who are immoral, or the greedy and swindlers or idolaters. In that case, you would have to leave this world. But now I'm writing to you that you must not associate with anyone who claims to be a brother or sister, but is sexually immoral, greedy, an idolater, a slanderer, a drunkard, or a swindler. Do not even eat with such people. What business is it of mine to judge those outside the church? Are you not to judge those inside? God will judge those outside. Paul has some really strong words. They are strong, especially for the Christians. For the Christians that are unrepentant. Like that guy in our passage that is sleeping with his stepmom. Strong words. But he even lists people who are greedy, people who are slanderers, gossipers. In that list, he lists them too. But now in the later part of the passage, he makes an important clarification that he's only talking about judging Christians. He tells us not to judge people outside of the faith. Paul is saying that it's pointless for us to expect non-Christians to live like they know Jesus. And to me, that makes sense. Why should I have Christian expectations on my atheist friend that doesn't want to be a Christian? Like, it doesn't make sense. So he's saying we shouldn't judge these people. As Paul says in verse 12, what business is it of mine to judge those outside of the church? Leave that up to God. As you see in the Gospels, Jesus he seems to always save his worst criticism for religious people. The ones already on the inside. Just read the Gospels and you see, he called them snakes and stuff, like very strong language. But at the same time, Jesus was actually really friendly toward sinners. Matthew 11, verse 19 says, the Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, here is a glutton, here is a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. But wisdom is proved right by her deeds. It's interesting because we're talking about reputation and stuff, and Jesus' reputation was being a friend of sinners. He was a friend. He hung out with them. So here's a measure of how Christ-like you are. How much of a friend are you to people outside the faith? Outside these walls? At people at work, how much of a friend are you to them? If you're judgmental and you're just like looking down on them, oh yeah, look at that guy. Look at that girl. Then you're doing it wrong. But if non-Christians actually like you, they actually genuinely like you because they see Jesus in you, they see something different. They see something different about you that's attractive to them, then that's a great sign. That's a great sign. Because maybe the most loving thing we can do for our neighbor is to be their friend. Not judge them, but through these friendships, we love and share the gospel. We invite them to a new way to live. And that is the standard that Jesus has for us. As we conclude. Our big question today was, what moral standards should we have in the church? We saw in our Bible passage that we need to confront. We need to confront the most serious sins among Christians. We have to. We cannot sweep it under the rug and then pretend it's going to disappear. We have to confront, speak the truth in love. But we also have to be honest with ourselves. We have to be honest with ourselves. What sins do you harbor that would do great damage, not only to you, but to your relationship with God? Because for some of us, our relationship with God is not doing good right now. So what sins affect your relationship with God? What sins affect the reputation of this church, the reputation of Jesus? Like I said, it matters. It matters. Jesus cares. He cares about the reputation of his church. So instead of sweeping it under the rug, instead of ignoring it, instead of putting up this brick wall, instead of putting up all this pride that you have, humble yourself. Humble yourself. Submit the most sinful parts of your life to God. He wants that. On the other hand, as you saw in our passage, we need to be patient with people who don't follow Jesus. It is not our business to look down on them. It is not our business to judge condescendingly to them. That is God's job. Our business is to love, is to share the gospel, invite them to a new way to live, just like Jesus did.